Dear friends, welcome to our channel. We are delighted to share with you different stories about love and betrayal from around the world. Now let's begin today's journey of stories. The sky in Atlanta showed a special kind of blue, bright but not harsh. This blue always reminded Curtis of their wedding day. Back then, Elise walked toward him in a pure white wedding dress under an equally amazingly blue sky. 15 years had passed, and he never thought their love would become what it is today. Curtis was an electrical engineer, specializing in home automation system design. 10 years ago, he co-founded a small company with a friend, providing customized smart home solutions for high-end residences. The business wasn't large, but it had a stable client base in the Atlanta area. Elise was a creative director at an advertising company, possessing amazing artistic talent and business acumen. Their two children, 13-year-old Tristan and 10-year-old Maya, were the source of joy for this family. On the surface, Curtis's family painted a perfect middle-class picture. But the truth was, Curtis had suspected his wife of having an affair for nearly 3 months. It all began with a strange phone call. Curtis received a missed dial from one of Elise's colleagues. The colleague promptly hung up in panic, but before that, he heard Elise's laughter in the background, crisp, relaxed, with a joy he hadn't heard in a long time. This wouldn't have caught his attention if Elise hadn't told him that evening that she was attending a client work meeting. Curtis was not naturally suspicious. In fact, he had always believed that marriage required sufficient space and trust. However, in the following weeks, some subtle changes made it impossible for him to ignore. Elise suddenly paid more attention to her appearance, buying new perfume and clothes. Her working hours became irregular, often going out after receiving urgent work calls in the evening, sometimes not returning until late at night. Most obviously, she began to show clear impatience with family life and grew cold toward Curtis's care and affection. Despite this, Curtis didn't immediately question her. He decided to understand more about the situation first. As an electrical engineer, he was very knowledgeable about technology, but he knew that secretly accessing his wife's phone or computer was not only illegal, but would permanently damage the trust between them. Instead, he chose a more traditional but legal approach. He hired a private investigator. "I just want to know the truth, no matter how painful it is," Curtis told the detective Dawson. "Most clients say that," Dawson replied calmly. "But when they truly face the truth, they often regret it." Curtis knew Dawson might be right, but he couldn't continue living in doubt and uncertainty. Dawson began his work, tracking Elise's whereabouts, taking photos, and collecting evidence. 2 weeks later, Dawson came to Curtis's office with a folder. "I suggest you find a quiet place to review these materials," he said seriously. Curtis waited until the evening when the children were asleep before opening the folder. The photos and videos recorded intimate scenes of Elise with a man in restaurants, hotels, and parks. The man was Vincent, a recently signed important client at Elise's company, the marketing director of a luxury hotel chain. Elise in the photos looked so happy, so relaxed, an expression that hadn't appeared on her face when she was with Curtis for a long time. What broke Curtis's heart the most was seeing Elise remove her wedding ring in one of the photos. With each page turned in the folder, Curtis felt his world collapsing. In the days that followed, Curtis acted normally. He went to work, took care of the children, discussed daily matters with Elise, but inside he was experiencing a storm. He recalled all the time they had spent together, their wedding, the birth of their children, the laughter and tears. He also thought about his possible mistakes. Perhaps he had been too focused on work. Perhaps he had neglected Elise's needs. But regardless, betrayal was never the way to solve problems. This deliberate choice and subsequent lies destroyed the foundation of their relationship, trust. Curtis needed time to think about his next move. He didn't want to act impulsively, especially considering the children's feelings. A week later, he made a decision. Their 15th wedding anniversary was approaching, and Elise had planned a family gathering, inviting relatives and friends from both sides to celebrate. Curtis decided to reveal the truth on that day. On the anniversary day, the weather was still clear, remarkably similar to their wedding day. Curtis helped Elise prepare everything, watching her busily arrange the table, decorate the living room, occasionally checking messages on her phone. She looked nervous and excited, and Curtis didn't know if this was because of the celebration or because of her secret with Vincent. In the evening, relatives and friends arrived one after another. Curtis's parents, Elise's sister and her husband, several couple friends, and Curtis's business partner Neil and his wife. The room was filled with laughter and blessings, everyone happy for this model couple. Halfway through dinner, Elise stood up to make a speech. She was wearing a newly purchased blue dress, looking radiant. "Thank you all for coming here tonight to celebrate 15 years of marriage with us," she smiled and said. "These 15 years haven't always been smooth sailing. We've had arguments and difficult periods, but we've always persevered." Curtis watched her, wondering how she could say these words so easily while dating another man behind his back. Most importantly, Elise continued, her gaze drifting towards the children. "We have two wonderful children. To be honest, if it weren't for the children, I would have left this incompetent man long ago." The room suddenly fell silent. Relatives and friends awkwardly looked at Curtis, not knowing whether this was a joke. Elise herself seemed to realize her slip-up, and the smile on her face froze. Curtis felt a chill run through his entire body. He had imagined various scenarios, but hadn't expected Elise to so publicly humiliate him in front of everyone. However, he didn't show anger or pain. Instead, he stood up, picked up his wine glass, and smiled at the surprised faces in the room, a toast to the truth. Then he drank all the wine in his glass and continued in a calm tone. "Truth is indeed an interesting thing. It can free us or destroy us." Elise just shared her truth. Perhaps now it's time to share mine. Curtis walked to a drawer in the dining room, took out an envelope, and placed the photos one by one on the dining table. "These are the moments my wife has spent with Vincent over the past 2 months. If you want to know who Vincent is, he's a client of Elise's company, and apparently, he's received very personalized service." The photos showed intimate interactions between Elise and Vincent on various occasions, from holding hands in restaurants to hugging and kissing in front of hotels. The last photo was of Elise in a jewelry store, trying on a ring markedly different from the engagement ring Curtis had given her. "Oh, and one more thing," Curtis added, his voice carrying a hint of cold anger. "Vincent is married with 3 children. It seems our marriage wasn't exciting enough for you, Elise, so you decided to ruin someone else's family." The atmosphere in the room became heavy. Elise's face turned pale, her hands trembling. Her sister looked at the photos in shock, while other guests uncomfortably lowered their heads or exchanged glances. 13-year-old Tristan suddenly stood up from his seat, gave his mother an angry look, and rushed out of the dining room. Maya began to sob quietly, and Curtis's mother quickly went to comfort her. "I apologize for everyone's discomfort tonight," Curtis continued, his voice returning to calmness, "but I believe the truth should be revealed. Now, please allow me to end this celebration early." The guests left quickly, leaving Curtis and Elise to face this marital crisis alone. Maya was sent to her room upstairs, and Curtis's mother volunteered to stay and look after the children. Tristan was still locked in his room, refusing to talk to anyone. When the last guest left, Elise finally spoke, her voice broken with panic. "Curtis, I can explain." "Explain what?" Curtis interrupted her, his voice filled with cold anger. "Explain how you dated another man behind my back? Explain how you humiliated me in front of our children and relatives and friends on our anniversary day? Or explain why you think I'm an incompetent man?" Elise tried to approach him, but Curtis stepped back as if she carried some contagious disease. "No, Elise. Stay away from me." "Curtis, you need to understand." Elise's tone suddenly shifted from pleading to defensive. "Our marriage has had problems for a long time. Do you know how long it's been since we've truly communicated? You're always working, and even at home, you're absent-minded. Every day is the same routine. I feel suffocated." Curtis stared at her in disbelief. "So this is my fault. Because I work hard to support this family, you have the right to betray our marriage vows? To have an affair with another married man? I'm not saying it's your fault," Elise countered, the tears in her eyes replaced by anger. "But you at least share some responsibility. Vincent gave me things you never did: excitement, passion, the feeling of being appreciated. And now," Curtis asked coldly, "how do you feel now, when your little trick has been exposed to everyone?" Elise was silent for a moment, then looked up directly at him, her eyes flashing with complex emotions, not pure remorse, but a mixture of anger, fear, and a certain stubborn self-defense. "I feel angry, Curtis. Angry that you hired a private detective to follow me. Angry that you chose to humiliate me in front of everyone instead of resolving the issue privately. Curtis let out a cold laugh. Just like how you humiliated me at the dinner? Don't paint yourself as the victim, Elise. You ruined our marriage, ruined our family. So what now? Elise asked, her voice trembling but challenging. Are you going to leave me? Curtis stared at her for a long time, pain and anger intertwined in his eyes. No, Elise. I won't leave. I will ask for a divorce. I will fight for custody of the children. I will make sure you pay for your choices. He turned and walked toward the stairs, but stopped halfway and added without looking back, I'll contact a lawyer tomorrow morning. Until then, you can sleep in the guest room. That night, Curtis lay alone in the bed they once shared, his heart filled with the bitterness of betrayal. He knew that no matter how hard he tried, their lives would never be the same again. Once trust is broken, it's like a shattered mirror. Even if you try to piece the fragments back together, the cracks will always exist. The next morning, Curtis got up to find that Elise had already left for work. He called his company to take a day off, deciding to use this time to sort out his thoughts. He checked his legal rights and consulted a divorce lawyer recommended by a friend. The lawyer, Florence, listened to Curtis's situation professionally and directly. Based on the evidence you've provided, you have a clear advantage in the divorce case, she explained. You have ample evidence of infidelity, and her public disparagement of you will also be favorable to the case. We have 2 children, Curtis reminded her, his voice tired. I don't want them to get hurt. That's understandable, Florence nodded. But please remember, living in an environment filled with resentment and distrust may be more harmful to children than parents separating. Whatever decision you make should be based on long-term considerations, not just immediate peace. Curtis rubbed his temples. I need time to think about all the options. But regardless, I want to first ensure that my interests and the children's interests are protected. A wise decision, Florence agreed, beginning to list the materials he needed to prepare. After leaving the lawyer's office, Curtis decided to learn more about Vincent's situation. Through social media and some basic internet searches, he discovered that Vincent was the marketing director of an international hotel chain, frequently traveling between cities. His Instagram account was full of photos of luxury hotels and business meetings, but also many family photos showcasing his happy times with his wife and 3 young children. What a hypocrite, Curtis muttered to himself. He continued browsing and found several photos of Vincent and Elise attending company events together. Elise looked radiant in the photos, and Vincent's gaze carried an undisguised possessiveness. What angered Curtis the most was that on the dates these photos were taken, Elise told him she was attending female colleague gatherings or working overtime. Curtis closed the computer, contemplating his next move. He wanted not just to end this already poisoned marriage, but also a sense of justice. He decided to first contact Vincent's wife, Sophia. After some investigation, he found her email address and sent a brief message, only saying he had important information about Vincent to share, and left his phone number. That afternoon, he received a call from Sophia. Is this Mr. Curtis? A cautious female voice asked. Yes, it's me. I'm Sophia. You mentioned in your email that you have information about my husband? Curtis took a deep breath, then simply stated the facts. Mrs. Sophia, I'm Curtis, Elise's husband. I have evidence that my wife and your husband are having an extramarital affair. There was silence on the other end for a moment, then a slight sob. You have evidence? Photos and videos, yes. I thought you should know the truth. I've suspected for a while, Sophia finally said, her voice trembling. But Vincent always had excuses, business trips, work dinners. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped I was wrong too, Curtis responded calmly. But that's the reality. If you're willing, we can meet, and I can show you all the evidence I have. Sophia agreed and suggested meeting at a neutral coffee shop. The next day, Curtis met with Sophia and handed her copies of all the evidence the detective had collected. Sophia was an elegant woman who, despite the sadness in her eyes, appeared extraordinarily calm. What do you plan to do? Sophia asked after reviewing all the materials. I've consulted a lawyer and am preparing to file for divorce, Curtis answered frankly. I can't continue living in lies, and I don't want my children to grow up in such an environment. Sophia nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. I understand. I will take similar action. Vincent needs to face the consequences of his choices. She paused, then said, "Thank you for telling me the truth, Mr. Curtis, despite how painful it is. In this matter, we might be the only two people who have been truly honest with each other." When Curtis returned home, he found Elise sitting in the living room waiting for him. Unlike the anger and defensiveness of last night, she looked tired and vulnerable today, as if she had aged 10 years overnight. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low and uncertain. "About our future, about the children." Curtis nodded, sitting down on the sofa opposite her, maintaining distance. "All right, let's talk. First, I want to say I'm sorry," Elise began. "I know an apology can't make up for everything I've done, but I want you to know that I regret how things have turned out." Curtis remained silent, his expression devoid of any emotion. He had heard too many empty apologies. "I've ended my relationship with Vincent," she continued. "It was a mistake from the beginning. I don't know what I was thinking. Why are you telling me this?" Curtis interrupted coldly. "Do you think it changes anything?" Elise bit her lip, seemingly searching for the right words. "I know we can't go back to how things were, Curtis, but for the sake of the children, can we find some way to coexist peacefully?" "I've contacted a lawyer," Curtis said bluntly. "Divorce proceedings will begin soon. As for the children, I'll fight for primary custody." Elise's face turned pale. "You can't do that. They need their mother." "They need stability and honesty," Curtis countered. "What were you thinking, Elise? Saying those things at the dinner? Humiliating me in front of the children? Do you know how angry Tristan is? He won't even look at you." "That was a mistake, a terrible mistake," Elise admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "I don't know why I said those things. Stress, guilt, alcohol. I don't know. But that's not what I truly think. You must believe me." Curtis shook his head, his eyes full of doubt. "The problem is, Elise, I no longer believe anything you say. Every promise, every explanation, in my eyes, is just another potential lie. That's the cost of betrayal, complete loss of trust." "And what about you?" Elise suddenly asked, her tone becoming sharp. "Have you never done anything wrong? Are you always so perfect?" "I never claimed to be perfect," Curtis responded calmly. "I have made mistakes, but I never betrayed our marriage vows, never deceived you, never had relations with others. This isn't about perfection, Elise. It's about basic respect and loyalty." Elise seemed not to have heard his words, continuing. "Do you know what led me to seek attention elsewhere? It was your emotional absence, your workaholism, your neglect of our marriage." Curtis felt a wave of fatigue sweep over his body. This was her true face, when unable to gain sympathy, immediately turning to accusations and attacks. "If you had issues with our marriage, you should have communicated with me, not jumped into another man's bed. Your choices, your actions, are entirely your responsibility, Elise. Don't try to make it my fault." "Then why didn't you tell me earlier that you knew?" Elise countered. "Why wait until the anniversary to humiliate me in front of everyone?" "Because you deserve to experience what it feels like to be publicly humiliated," Curtis answered frankly. "Because I wanted everyone to know the truth, not the story you fabricated. Because I didn't want to continue living in lies." They fell into silence, the air filled with unspoken resentment and hurt. "So this is it?" Elise finally asked. 15 years of marriage ending like this?" "Yes," Curtis confirmed, "ending like this. You killed it, Elise, the moment you chose betrayal." Curtis stood up, indicating the conversation was over. "I suggest you find a lawyer. We can try to remain civil, but I won't compromise on any important issues." That evening, Curtis tried to talk to the children. Maya, despite being younger, seemed to understand to some degree what had happened. She cried, asking Dad if they were getting divorced, if the family would break apart. Curtis answered as honestly but gently as possible, confirming there would be changes, but his love would never change. Tristan was more difficult. The teenager refused to open the door, only briefly saying he didn't want to talk about anything. Curtis could hear faint sobbing behind the door, which broke his heart even more thoroughly. His children were suffering because of Elise's selfish actions, something he could never forgive. In the days that followed, the atmosphere at home was tense and heavy. Elise moved to the guest room, while Curtis began looking for a new place to live. He decided to let the children stay in the home to maintain some stability in their lives, while he planned to rent an apartment nearby. A week later, while Curtis was working in his office, he received a call from Vincent. Curtis, we need to talk. Vincent's voice sounded tense and angry. We have nothing to talk about. Vincent, Curtis responded coldly. You bastard. You ruined everything for me. Vincent roared. Sophia took the kids, froze our joint accounts, and my career is completely over. Sounds like you're finally facing the consequences of your actions, Curtis answered calmly, feeling a twisted satisfaction inside. It was just a damn affair. Vincent raged. Everyone does it. Elise seduced me. She was already unhappy with your marriage. She told me how incompetent you were, how boring. Curtis clenched his fist but kept his voice steady. So you think stealing someone else's wife is harmless? You think betraying the trust of your wife and 3 children is acceptable? You're a pathetic scumbag, Vincent. Listen, Curtis. Vincent's voice lowered to a threatening hiss. You don't know who you're messing with. I have friends, connections. You'll regret this, I swear. Curtis let out a cold laugh. Threatening me? Try it. I've recorded this call, and if you dare come near me or my family, I'll immediately hand this recording to the police and your former employer. By the way, your ex-wife's lawyer might also be interested in this. There was a frustrated curse on the other end, then the busy tone of hanging up. Curtis took a deep breath, trying to quell the anger inside. He wasn't usually a vengeful person, but for the man who destroyed his marriage, he couldn't feel any sympathy. That evening, Curtis returned home to find Elise preparing dinner in the kitchen, an obvious attempt to ease the tense atmosphere. The children were already seated at the table, nervously playing with their cutlery. I made your favorite steak, Elise said softly, placing a plate of food in front of him. Curtis looked at the children, then nodded to Elise out of politeness. Thank you. Dinner proceeded in awkward silence, with only the sound of cutlery collision. Tomorrow I'll move to the new apartment, Curtis finally said, his voice calm and determined. It's only 10 minutes away, so I can visit you often. He looked at the children. You can come see me anytime, I promise. And what about us? Elise asked. We just live separately like this? This is a temporary arrangement, Curtis explained, until the divorce is finalized. The lawyer advised us to keep our distance to avoid further conflict. Divorce, Elise repeated, her voice almost a whisper. You've really decided. Yes, Elise, I've decided, Curtis confirmed, his gaze steady. Some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. Trust is one of them. Tristan suddenly stood up, angrily throwing his fork onto the plate. This is all because of you, he shouted at his mother, his eyes filled with tears. You ruined our family. Tristan, Elise exclaimed in surprise, reaching out to touch her son's shoulder, but he dodged. Don't touch me, Tristan shouted. I hate you. You're a liar. Then he rushed out of the dining room, slamming his bedroom door shut. Maya began to cry, and Curtis quickly pulled her into his arms to comfort her. Sure, it's okay, dear. Everything will be all right. But we're not a family anymore, Maya sobbed. Curtis's heart broke. We will always be a family, Maya, just in a different way. Your mom and dad both love you and Tristan very much. That will never change. Elise quietly watched this scene, her eyes full of regret and tears. But Curtis no longer believed her tears. He had seen how quickly she could switch from apology to accusation, how she tried to manipulate emotions. This time, her remorse would not change anything. After the divorce proceedings officially began, things became even more difficult. Elise hired an aggressive lawyer and began questioning Curtis's finances and parenting abilities. Despite evidence of infidelity, she still fought for joint custody and substantial alimony. Her lawyer even suggested that Curtis's supervision of the children was inadequate due to his irregular working hours. She's playing tricks, Florence warned Curtis in a meeting. It's a strategy to make you tired of fighting, to accept unfavorable conditions for peace. I won't give in, Curtis said firmly. Not on property, not on the children. The battle continued for months, becoming increasingly ugly. Elise began spreading lies to their mutual friends, claiming Curtis had always been emotionally distant and neglectful of the family. She even suggested Curtis had violent tendencies, although there was absolutely no evidence to support this. Some friends began taking sides, while others completely withdrew from their lives. But Curtis had evidence: the detective's report, photos, a recording of Vincent's threats to him, and most importantly, numerous witnesses to Elise's public humiliation of him at the dinner. The court quickly saw through Elise's lies and manipulation. The judgment finally came, a complete defeat for Elise. The judge ruled that Curtis would receive primary custody, while Elise would get limited visitation rights every other weekend and specific holidays. The property division was also favorable to Curtis. He retained full ownership of his company shares and most of their joint assets. The judge specifically cited Elise's infidelity and malicious defamation during the litigation as the basis for the ruling. Vincent's situation was equally bleak. Sophia hired a shrewd divorce lawyer and, after discovering Vincent's hidden assets, successfully obtained an extremely favorable judgment. Vincent not only lost joint custody of the children, but was also required to pay substantial alimony. Worse still, his employer, upon learning of this scandal, immediately terminated his position, citing violation of professional ethics codes. He had used his position to engage in an inappropriate relationship with a client. After losing his job, family, and reputation, Vincent was forced to accept a position with a salary far below his previous one, barely enough to maintain the most basic living and pay alimony. He had tried to express remorse to Curtis through mutual friends, but Curtis completely ignored these attempts. For him, Vincent was not worth any time or emotional investment. Elise's situation was not optimistic either. Her advertising company, upon learning of this scandal, conducted an internal investigation and found that she had used company resources and time for personal dates, and might even have leaked client information in her relationship with Vincent. She was immediately fired, her reputation in the industry in tatters. 2 years later, Curtis's life was back on track. His company's business was thriving, and the children were gradually adapting to the new living arrangements. Tristan's anger toward his mother had somewhat diminished, but he still kept his distance, communicating with her only when necessary. Maya was more forgiving but had also become more independent, no longer relying on her mother for emotional support as she once did. Elise constantly tried to rebuild her relationship with Curtis, sending emails, leaving voice messages, even sneaking handwritten notes after the children returned home. She claimed she had changed, understood her mistakes, and hoped for a second chance. But Curtis firmly refused any interaction beyond necessary communication. For him, Elise was dead. At least, the Elise he had once loved was dead. "Curtis, please," Elise begged one day while picking up the children. "At least talk to me. We can't go on like this forever." "We have nothing to talk about, Elise," Curtis calmly responded. "Our only connection is the children. Beyond that, I have nothing to say to you." "Do you really hate me that much?" she asked, her eyes filled with tears. "So much that you refuse even basic conversation?" "I don't hate you," Curtis answered honestly. "Hate requires investing emotion and energy, and I don't want to waste any of either on you. I just don't care anymore." This hurt more than any sharp words. Elise left trembling, truly understanding for the first time the permanent damage she had caused. Vincent's fate was more tragic. After losing everything, he began drinking heavily, eventually getting arrested for drunk driving, resulting in him losing his remaining visitation rights. He tried multiple times to contact Curtis, claiming he had deeply reflected and hoped to make up for past mistakes. But Curtis deleted every message, blocked every phone number. For him, Vincent did not deserve any form of redemption or reconciliation. 5 years later, in a chance encounter, Curtis saw Elise working at a coffee shop. Having lost her high-paying position and property after the divorce judgment, she was forced to accept work far below her education and experience level. She looked much older, the spark and confidence that once shone in her eyes completely gone. When she saw Curtis, she gave a sad and awkward smile. "Hi, Curtis." "Elise." He calmly nodded in acknowledgement, not showing any emotional fluctuation. "You look good," she commented, her voice tinged with sadness. "How's the company?" "Good," Curtis answered briefly, not wanting to engage in any deep conversation. "And the children?" "Tristan must be in college now." "Yes, he's studying computer science at Georgia Tech. Maya is doing well in high school, considering applying to art school." A mixture of pride and sadness flashed in Elise's eyes. "That's good. I'm glad to hear it." She paused, then added, "You know, I miss them. Although we have visitation time, it's not the same." Curtis just nodded, not wanting to discuss the obvious fact. Her relationship with the children had been permanently altered. entirely as a result of her own choices. Do you have a new relationship? Elise carefully asked. Curtis considered whether to answer this personal question, but decided to respond simply. Yes, I'm in a relationship now. This was true. 3 years after the divorce, Curtis began dating a woman named Natalie, an architect who understood and respected his responsibilities and boundaries as a single father. Their relationship developed slowly but steadily, built on mutual respect and honesty. Oh, Elise said, her voice carrying obvious disappointment. That's good. I'm happy for you. After an awkward silence, Curtis prepared to leave. I should go? Have a nice day, Elise. Curtis, Elise called out as he turned. I know this may mean nothing, but I'm truly sorry. For everything. I regret the choices I made every day. Curtis looked at her, for the first time truly seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes. But it was too late, too little. Thank you for your apology, Elise. I hope it brings you some peace. But for me, that's all in the distant past. He left the coffee shop, feeling a final sense of relief. Not because of forgiveness. He had never forgiven Elise's betrayal and never would. But because he had finally completely freed himself from that relationship. Her pain, regret, or apologies no longer had any effect on him. He had moved on, built a new life, while she remained in the past, with her choices and consequences. 10 years later, when Tristan graduated from graduate school, Elise and Curtis shared the same occasion for the last time. Their son had become a successful software engineer and was about to marry his college girlfriend. Maya had also grown into a talented young woman, studying graphic design at an art college. At the gathering after the graduation ceremony, Elise tried to have one last meaningful conversation with Curtis. Our children have grown up, she said softly, standing next to Curtis. Watching Tristan talk with friends. They've become remarkable people. Yes, they have, Curtis agreed, unusually not ending the conversation immediately. I know it's mainly because of you, Elise admitted, her voice carrying a subtle choke. All these years, you've been their solid support. And I've just been a weekend parent, a holiday guest. Curtis didn't deny this. It was the truth. Do you know what I regret the most? Elise continued. Not just losing you, losing our marriage, but watching my children grow up without truly knowing them, not being a real presence in their lives. It's a pain I cannot describe. Curtis finally turned to face her, looking directly into her eyes. You know, Elise, this is precisely the power of choice. Each of us makes choices in life, and then we must live with the consequences. You chose betrayal and lies, and these choices have permanent consequences. I know. Elise nodded sadly. I pay for it every day. I just wish I had realized earlier. Curtis looked at their children, then back at Elise. We cannot change the past, only accept that it has shaped who we are now. He paused, then added, for the children's sake, I'm glad we've been able to maintain civility. But that's all the relationship there is between us, Elise. That's enough. They stood there quietly, two people who once loved each other but were permanently separated by betrayal, watching their children, the only lasting product of their marriage, flourish. In the years that followed, life continued to move forward. Curtis eventually married Natalie, building a peaceful and fulfilling new family. Elise remained alone. Though she had several relationships, none lasted. Vincent finally found stable work at a small motel, but his life was just a pale shadow of his past glory. His relationship with his ex-wife and children was forever broken, an inevitable result of his own choices. There are no winners in stories of betrayal, only different degrees of failure and pain. But one lesson clearly emerges. Our choices define us, shape the trajectory of our lives, and some choices have permanent consequences that cannot be erased by any amount of apology or remorse. Truth is like that glass of wine Curtis raised at the anniversary dinner, bitter and strong, but sometimes it's the only thing that can truly set us free. Because only in the light of truth can we see clearly our choices and the inevitable consequences these choices lead to. A toast to truth, no matter how painful it may be. If this story resonated with you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling content. Looking forward to seeing you in our next story.